Justin, Scott, I don't know where you guys are, but come on up. I'll try to make up a little bit of time here, but it's good, like, to see your actual bio, like, of such a good friend, longtime friend, and I don't know, I want to read it all, but it might take too long. But seeing how you won, Justin, the National Intelligence Medallion in 2016, I think I may have forgotten that. Justin, former acting undersecretary for economic affairs, that was in the Obama administration when he was recruited by Penny Pritzker. Worked on developing national and international data protection standards, including the EU-US Privacy Shield, GDPR, NIST cyber guidelines. Very smart. And then he started a company. So lawyer, private equity lawyer, then in the administration, and then he does a startup called Waterwheel, backed by NEA. He exited that, and now he's been in the venture ecosystem. And he's helping a lot of companies, and you're an advisor to us and a venture partner to us. And we sure are happy to have you on the team and happy to have you here today. Scott, awesome to have you here. Scott feels like family. He's a member of our limited partner advisory committee, so also like an advisor to us. And you guys all, what year did you start working with Kelly?
I guess it was 19 years ago.
Yeah. You and Eric and Kelly.
Yep.
And Scott's going to talk about his company, Signal, which is moonshotting for sure, and it'll even be better than your last. Bitium, which I'm happy to say we invested in Scott sold it to Google, and that was a great outcome for everybody. Right now, you're backed by Cisco, Microsoft, M12, and Moonshots Capital. Thanks for allowing us to be part of this journey. Over to you, Justin. Thank you both for being here.
Awesome. Well, first of all, to the whole Moonshots team, thanks for having me here today. And I'm really excited to be on this panel here with Scott. And we're going to be talking a little bit about fundraising in a minute. But this is, of course, an extraordinary leadership conference. And I loved hearing Blake's stories and having just a very honest, blunt insight into what it's like to start a company and get to where you are. Because, to be honest, from the outside world, it looks often like a linear upward thing. But when you're actually starting a company, it's like a roller coaster. You're up and down. And to have somebody come up and just say, honestly, this is what it was really like, it's an important thing. Scott, we're going to talk about fundraising in a second, but one of the most exciting things you can say to somebody who's investing in companies is, I'm a serial entrepreneur with multiple, sort of a really successful exits. And you've been in the identity access management space for a while. Do you mind just starting by telling us a little bit about your experience founding Bitium and the exit to Google?
Yeah, sure. It was actually, I knew nothing about identity like Blake in 2011, and was working for Kelly at the time, another startup with my co-founder. And we were trying to figure out how people get access to things at our company. We had developers and product people coming and going, and we didn't really know how to manage it, and no one seemed to. So we ended up evaluating a piece of software, a company called Okta. We didn't think it was good. And so I think as a lot of entrepreneurs, it's better to not know a lot about what you're getting into because you probably would talk yourself out of it. But we decided to start a competitor to Okta. Kelly, as an angel investor, was the first check-in, joined the board. We ended up competing directly with Okta, raising venture funds over 6 years. And I think it was the same month that we beat Okta at Bank of America and Liberty Mutual in competitive deals that they filed to go public. And we were far behind that. And so we looked at ourselves and said, what does this mean for us? Is this good? Is this bad? It seems interesting. And what we didn't realize that it had the byproduct of creating a very frothy environment in the industry where folks were looking around saying, who else is doing this? This is not a product. This is a company. And so not to belabor the point, but It was a quick frothy acquisition process, and we ended up at Google Cloud. And so the product today is still there. It is their counter to Microsoft Security. So it's the entree for Google. It's called Google Cloud Identity. And so yeah, so that was like Craig said, a happy day for everybody. Interesting time because I don't think we necessarily were planning on selling a company, but you have to kind of, look yourself in the mirror and say, is it going to take us 10 years to get back to this valuation? And then make sure it's right for everybody. So yeah, and then at Google, worked rebuilding that product with our team and adding more folks onto the team. For those that don't know, Alphabet is the parent company of Google, and these things that they have that are product areas of most companies they call bets, and GCP is a bet. So when I joined, I thought it was extremely exciting until I met the people in ads, and they said, "Oh, that cloud thing, how's that going? Like, is that working out?" And like, yeah, we did $4 billion last year in revenue, and they're like, "Oh, I hope that works." And you're like, "Look at that." So that was a very unique experience. So it's a large company, and at the time that I joined, it had about 385,000 full-time employees and contractors, vendors. Half were employees, half contractors, vendors around the world. There was an interesting time there where Hong Kong was being pulled in pretty close to China. I think everyone remembers that. And they were trying to figure out, what does this mean from a security perspective? And is the Chinese government going to come into the Google offices in Hong Kong and ask to see global data for customers, that type of thing? And so how do we deal with this? And they didn't know. And I met a GM that met me and heard that I was kind of getting a little bit loose in my seat because I'd been there 2 years. And he said, "I think you have another 2 years that it would be better for you to stay if you could. And I know you're thinking about leaving and starting something new. But we have this really hard problem to solve. And I heard you're a delusional entrepreneur, and I think it would work out perfectly well." And at the time, I took it as a compliment. I'm still not sure if it was. And so I looked at the problem, and it was complicated because that sounds simple, just cut off everything from Hong Kong. But when you need to understand that these are product areas spanning everything from AdWords to Geo to Android, and that these are hundreds of thousands of employees, and there's thousands of surfaces, that means infrastructure, applications, data layers, you all have to create a policy in one place to manage that. It was impossible at the time. And so that was the problem that they asked me to try to solve. It was me and one other engineer. Spent the next 2 years, we solved the problem. And we deployed it at Google. My team got promoted, and I got inspired. And I went out to the market, and I asked people that were CISOs of large enterprises. I told them my story, and I said, "How are you solving it?" Because Google doesn't always solve things the best way, even though they say they do. And across the board, everyone said the same thing. We're probably going to build a team of 20 to 30 people to do this. And I thought, why are you spending tens of millions of dollars a year in operational expense in order to solve this problem? And so that was really the inspiration. Quit Google, 4 years and 1 week. The extra week was to make sure that my team got through promotion. Left Google on a Tuesday, incorporated a new company on a Wednesday, and was always in touch with Moonshots, which we were lucky to get as an investor again.
I love the story, I really do, and it gets to your background and why coming to this next problem was so significant. I'm going to talk about fundraising in 1 minute, if you don't mind. But as I mentioned to you, when I left the government, I learned how to code just so I could understand what I was going to be doing when I started building our software company. But I told you, I code like a blind monkey. I'm absolutely horrendous. And I had to learn a lot about it just so I could talk about it, but you would never hire me to do anything. And then when I sold Wirewheel, I started to look deeply at the AI space, and just to understand it. And one of the biggest issues that I can see, and this is why I think Signal is going to be a critical part of the infrastructure for all of AI, in my view, is around this very hard problem of authorization, super hard problem. Now, if you don't mind, because it helps me frame this issue about why it's so important, I'm going to throw out a little analogy story so we can walk through authentication and authorization for a minute. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, great.
Okay. I'm going to pick 2 names randomly just to sort of have a common thing, just picking them out. So let's imagine 2 people named, I don't know, Greg and Nellie. Okay, just to pick names randomly out of a hat. Greg and Nellie go up to a bar, okay, and there's a bouncer outside. And Greg's really good looking, Nellie's beautiful. They pull out their IDs. They hand the IDs to the bouncer. Bouncer looks at the IDs, confirms that these two beautiful people look like their ID. What is that? Authentication or authorization?
So that's authentication and a little bit of identity verification. Talking to a little.
Yeah, we got a little shout out to Blake in there too. But yeah, we got authentication. Why? Okay, so that's a very important concept. That's stage one. You know who they are. When the bouncer says, "All right, I see you are who you are. You look like two really nice people, Greg and Nellie," and lets them into the bar, what is that? Authentication or authorization?
It's authorization, but on the border.
On the border? Okay, but they're in, right? They're in the bar. Now, they walk back to the VIP room, okay? Now, Greg, everybody loves. Greg is the person that when you come to Austin and you need reservations, you want to get into the sushi restaurant or whatever, you call Greg. Greg gets you in, okay? Now, Nellie's beautiful, super smart, been investing in restaurants for a long time. But, if I could be honest with you, Nellie's a little blunt, okay? So the bouncer, Nellie walks back to the bouncer, and the bouncer had been trying to start a restaurant, and Nellie said no bluntly, okay, randomly. So now, in all of the context that bouncer has before the VIP room, knows who Nellie is, and opens the gate, lets Craig in, but doesn't let Nellie in. Is that authentication or authorization?
That's authorization, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now why? What is it that makes that an important issue?
Well, I think authentication is recognizing who the actual human or non-human is and saying, we know this, the rest of it is up to the context of what's happening. And I would go so far as to say, that it's a Halloween and they're both wearing costumes, you can't actually see who they are. But by their behavior, you can tell what they're doing and what they should and should not be doing. So were Kelly and Craig, because I know that's who we're really talking about here, were they in Las Vegas 3 hours ago, and was it possible for them to get there in that amount of time? Or is it someone else in a costume that somehow authenticated as them? I think, so increasingly what we're finding is that authentication is somewhat of a solved problem through folks like Microsoft and Google. The identity verification, really hard problem solved by ID.me. The authorization problem is the dangerous part, and when you start to extrapolate that beyond humans and costumes and into agents that are not individual humans, it gets a little bit terrifying.
It does get terrifying, and that's why this is a huge, really hard problem. So you got a serial entrepreneur taking on a really hard problem that's going to be critical to the way all AI systems and agent systems and model context protocol, which we'll come to in a minute. All right, now we get to fundraising. So now we're in fundraising. You've got Microsoft, the leading fund. You've got Cisco, which is the premier fund in security. You've got Steve Ward, Insight Advisor. He's former CISO at Secret Service, and you've got Moonshots, phenomenal all the way through. And I can tell you personally, we all have a lot of choices, and when you get to the point where you're going to work with folks, for me personally, getting to work with Greg and Nellie so closely, really good people, but also they want to add value at any point. So do you mind just telling me a little bit about how you got to know Moonshots?
Yeah, well, how I got to know Moonshots, so Kelly had hired me, and he was the first check into the company. When he started a fund, I'd like to think I was the first check into the fund, maybe. Probably not, but close.
Greg keeps track of that.
Yeah. So I knew Moonshots as the angel investors, both Craig and Kelly, as individuals before Moonshots. And Kelly was on the board, first check-in, so spent a lot of time together. There's a lot of elements to strategic investors, and I think a lot of times entrepreneurs focus on the company, like Microsoft, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the individuals that are involved, even at those large companies. So when it comes to Moonshots, our seed round, we raised a $12 million seed round. It took us about 2 weeks to do that. I think a lot of that is the credibility of just, for some reason, after you sell your company to Google and do something interesting, all of a sudden you're more credible. I don't know. But it was an aggressive round. It was late 2021, and if anyone remembers that time period in venture, I think the most polite way to say it is that it was not very disciplined. And so we could have raised more. We could have gone with all the funds that you have heard of on Sand Hill Road. And we decided to go with a seed fund focused in security, but we insisted that they leave some room for what we considered strategic investors, and that included Moonshots. So I think it's important to know that its strategy just doesn't mean a logo. It means the people and what comes with that. And so we actually, that round did not include Microsoft or Cisco. The way that those became investors, we were actually doing a proof of concept with Cisco as a customer. And it was going well. They're identity folks, and they have a large identity practice. It's called Duo now, where they bought Duo for, I think, $2 to $3 billion. And it's grown crazy. They looked at it and said, yeah, it'd be great if we're a customer, but actually you're so well aligned with our strategy, like we would like to think about this as an investment. I considered it, and I think us selling to enterprises, so we're focused a lot on the Fortune 500 and even more increasingly on the Fortune 50. The credibility means a lot, and it's not enough to say I'm a founder that started an identity company and sold to Google. Like, no one cares. So we thought Cisco would be helpful, but if we were going to take strategic money, I thought we need more credibility than one, and we need it to be a much bigger powerhouse. And so in security, with everything that Satya has done, like turning around Microsoft, which is what I consider him doing, we thought Microsoft would be a great logo. I reached out to folks that I knew at Microsoft, and I said, hey, who should I talk to about investment? They introduced me to their venture fund. We showed them what we were up to. They said, we've been waiting for someone to solve this problem in a smart way, and we hadn't seen anyone do it before. We absolutely are in. And so that became a part of a $10 million safe that we rolled into a $30 million Series A.
So, I mean, and congratulations, $42 million raised already, phenomenal funds behind you, phenomenal people behind you. So now I want to talk about Signal for a minute and where this is going. When I took 6 months off after I sold my company, I basically worked almost exclusively in the AI space, and I learned a lot personally, stuff I didn't really understand. And one of the key things that I did not realize about models was they don't understand certain things. It was almost more important for me to learn what models didn't do than it was to understand what they did do. And one of the key things I saw really early on, models don't understand spreadsheets, and they don't necessarily understand data that comes out of an application. So, and it makes sense, right? Because if you're a human being and somebody shows you a table and you don't know what the columns mean and the rows mean and you don't know what the heading means, it's just a bunch of data. So what's becoming clear to me is that the biggest accelerator for almost all of artificial intelligence is going to be connecting up models to other systems and other data in a way that they can actually understand what the heck that data means. That's a critical thing. So you see agent protocol coming up and you see model context protocol coming up, but neither one of those have this authorization layer built in, which is an incredible opportunity. So you're in the situation where they basically cannot understand what you would call maybe half of the data on Earth, and the only way they can understand it is by connecting it to other systems. So that is an epic challenge. But you're moving from authenticating people to authenticating machines. How are you thinking about that problem, and how is Signal set up to deal with that problem?
Yeah, I mean, our core from the beginning was we were agnostic to what the principle was, whether it was a user, a non-human identity, or an agent. And so we didn't think of this as a human problem. We just knew that that was a place where enterprises had budget. And to be more specific, when I talked about that Hong Kong example, you can take any large company today and ask them, are you comfortable with how your site reliability engineers are getting to your production infrastructure? And 100% of the time, the answer is no, we're not happy. And when you ask them why, it uses old technology to establish that they're in a certain group, to be able to check in and out credentials, get in. It's missing this whole piece of context. And that context might be as simple as they're assigned a ticket in a support system, or they're on call, or they're in the right place, or their device is compliant. That context and how that applies to the person accessing And then when that context changes, completely removing them from the thing you gave them access to, that's just a magic world from an identity perspective. That's where we started because that was the use case. But again, when you look at the code and you look at how we architected it, we don't call them users, we call them principals. And so last year at this time, we were at RSA, which is this week, in San Francisco, and we were talking to a large bank about this problem. And they have agents running around, and they said these are non-human identities. And our answer at the time was, we built this for that. And it's sitting in their seat, I know what they were thinking. This guy's just waving his hand going, we do that, we can solve that problem, sign a contract. And I don't blame him for that. But I think what was missing is this core principle of some type of standard around the way that AI interacts. And to make this simple from a human perspective, how many people here use Claude or ChatGPT at all? Okay, so it's pretty cool, right? You can like have it write a sonnet, or I was talking last night, create an advisory group and ask it questions. You can't really have it interact with the external world today. You can't say, can you send an email for me? You can't say, can you order me DoorDash? And where this is going and where it needs to go is that you're actually prompted from your AI to ping you and say, hey, I noticed you just landed in LA. You hadn't been there in 3 months, and the last time you were there, you ate at Versailles, and Versailles has delivery. Would you like me to have this delivered to your hotel? That sounds magical. This is where things like really are interesting. But for that to happen, you have to have the user known, the AI acting on behalf of them, and having an exchange with these third-party services like DoorDash, your calendar, your flights. Think about the security implication of them being able to represent you in different places. And so what this protocol and what these few protocols have come out and said is, we need a consistent way for any AI to interact with any system. It was Anthropic that announced it in November. People were skeptical. Of course, it's like when any large company comes out with a standard, it's their standard. When OpenAI announced that they were supporting it, I think it was late January or February, all of a sudden people woke up and said, and that's where if you were on LinkedIn that day, you would notice everyone with an application or service said, we have an MCP server. We have an MCP server. It's the equivalent of saying we have open APIs and you can integrate with us. Great, it is great, but it doesn't actually solve a lot of the problems. And I think there is this missing authorization layer which says, what should that thing be doing on your behalf? Because if you don't get in the way there, this turns from, the figure AI robots going grocery shopping to the Terminator. And we really have to be careful there. And that's not an exaggeration at all. If we don't pay attention, there's really bad things that are going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it already. When the Snowden we all are familiar with what he did, but he had the right to be on that system. He did not have the right to access some of those files even out of the box. But if there had been a way at the time that you saw some of the signal, like was he accessing a bunch of things that he wasn't supposed to? That's a pretty big signal. Is he on at hours that he shouldn't be working? There's like other things that are context that can prevent somebody getting access to certain things in the human world that could have prevented things like that. But now, as you're saying, we're getting to the point where people are going to be giving permission to connect to something for one purpose, but they shouldn't be doing it for another purpose. Or there's a reason why if that agent starts acting in a certain way, that non-human agent, that you might say, you know what, there's something weird going on here. That needs to be stopped, and that's exactly what you're going after with Signal.
Yeah,
Do I have it right?
The name of the company is Signal, and these signals being sent between things are really the telemetry that you gather in order to make decisions and take action. So without this, the world is open and people can do anything. We're now moving to what we call a zero standing privilege world. It doesn't mean you can't do the things you want to do. If you do it correctly, you don't even notice that it exists. But if you're trying to do something you shouldn't, you sure know that that exists. So it's a little bit subtle, but I think being in a place where no one has standing access to anything digitally, including agents, unless there's the proper context, so everything is being evaluated. And there's a lot of technical complications come out of that with latency, but the new technologies available make this all possible. Like code writing, I heard a CEO of Abnormal Security talk about this yesterday. Code writing is no longer a differentiation. Your code base is no longer a differentiation as a business. You might as well open source it at this point because we're not that far away from pushing a button, this is his words, and creating the application. So then it's like, well, where are the differentiators? How do you build a business? And I think his main point was that it's in the relationships you have with customers, the trust that you've built, so that has the right guardrails in place, and the underlying data that supports your business. Because beyond that, this is a really different world in the next year, 2 years, 5 years.
I'm going to pivot in a second over to just the investor side to sort of ask you what you look for from folks who are investing in Signal. But just to put it concretely for me, another one that it didn't hit my radar, but I was in a session the other day where it turns out one of the major ways in which layoffs at a company when they're coming get leaked is from the team that's looking at the data loss prevention stuff. So you have security folks whose job is to look at when an alert comes up from a data loss prevention perspective in case stuff is being stolen. A lot of those alerts are when financial information is being sent out of the company. So a company's struggling, the CEO sends an email with their financial statements or some kind of analysis of layoffs to their outside advisors. It hits the DLP. The security team sees that. It's actually an appropriate item, but that person now knows something about the layoffs that may be happening in company and shares it internally, which was crazy to me. So you're talking about essentially somebody that's authorized to get it, but authorized to get certain information and not that information. These are really, really hard problems that are coming around the bend. And I assume these have to be done with something more automated than human beings trying to resolve all
Yeah,
of
I mean,
this.
the reality is today when something goes into the Security Operations Center, the SOC, and they get notified that there's a breach, it's too late. It's done. It's over. You should be focused on the next one because that is done. And so it's how do you prevent that from happening? Yeah, the data layer, so this is many different layers, data layer. But yeah, the use case you're talking about, I think, is actually, I'm not going to name the company. It's a very large company where someone was doing headcount planning and they were interacting with an internal LLM and asking, what's my headcount next quarter? And it came back a few hundred short of what they thought. And so they did some prompting, asked, well, who's getting laid off? And they got the list of people, and they were on the list. And really, this is the story that, and so how do you prevent that from happening? Because these LLMs are super powerful, but how do you prevent the wrong data from getting exposed? And so and it has to be in real time. It can't be backwards looking. Oh, let's file a ticket for that. Let's do an incident response. No, it's not going to work.
I totally agree with you. And so now pivoting over the investor, I've raised money, you've raised money multiple times. You don't have to name any names, but there have been, there's good experiences with investors, there's challenging ones, there's folks that add value, there's folks that, pass it, which is also fine.
Yeah.
When you're going out to raise money for, you've done it before, you made it through and you had a great outcome. You're now taking on a super hard problem. For the same reasons, this is a very important problem. It's a game-changing problem. You can read anything. You go to any article right now about model context protocol and agent protocol, which is like basically what every developer is thinking about. Every article mentions authorization and how we're going to deal with this, and it's a very, very hard problem. How do you think about what the people that you led into the cap table and who are going to be your partners for, as you're kind of getting married, right? You get married to somebody and these firms because they're on your cap table basically for your entire journey. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the stage. So just like looking for advisors in your life in any area, you try to get advisors that are a step or two beyond where you are in life, I think. You definitely don't go backwards and get someone that's going to give you advice that they haven't any experience. I think the same is true with capital. It's frankly, there's a lot of dry powder out there. It's easy to raise money. So it's not about the money. I think for certain entrepreneurs that haven't done it before, it is challenging and you have to be a little bit more flexible. I've been lucky enough to never bring anyone on the board that was problematic. I think my last company, we had always feared getting the wrong person on the board. We did a lot of diligence, a lot of reference checking on people before we brought them in. At that time, I believed that a great venture board member, all they have to do is not cause problems. That's what I believed. I don't think that's the case now. I think that you figure out who can provide the value that you need. And for a late stage company, it might be navigating the IPO process. For an early stage company like me, it was somebody that has a good network that understands the product and understands how difficult it is to go to market in enterprise. So we brought on Brightmind. We were lucky enough to have a lot of options again. It was a new fund, which had its risk to it. But the individual you mentioned, Steve Ward, so former Secret Service, the CISO of Home Depot, is on the board of Abnormal, was at Insight Venture Partners, was an angel investor in Wiz, so we've seen that hyper growth. For those that don't know Wiz, they were the company that went from 1 to 100 million in less than a year, and then got to $1 billion in 18 months later and just sold to Google for $32 billion, largest acquisition Google's ever made. So having that DNA and that experience, because you can't learn by just trying things yourself. You have to learn from people that have done it and failed, or done it and succeeded. And so that's what I focus on, is what's the next step, the incremental step of where we need to go, and who are the right people to get in. But never losing sight of, don't put anyone on there that's problematic. And so with every employee, with every board member, with every advisor, we do so many reference checks. And I remember we were talking to our VP of marketing. I was talking to her the other day, and I said, you know, it was interesting, now that I've worked with you, I told her, I was told that when you are given a goal, you will do anything to get to the goal, including kill people and step on dead bodies. And like, I can clearly see that now. And she said, who told you that? And I said, Grady. And she goes, I didn't give you Grady's name as a reference. How do you know Grady? And it was her boss at SailPoint. And I said, yeah, we check references that you don't give us. Like, I think you have to do that extra bit to avoid some of the downfalls that, you know, Blake was talking about, where you have to let someone go because it wasn't the right fit, or it creates a stressful situation. So I think the upfront work pays off when it comes to talent.
Totally agree with you. I want to make sure, are there questions that folks have for Scott? I know we covered a lot. Awesome. Scott, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
This was
Ryan.
great.
Yeah, it's awesome.